of course, the incredible Jake Ice. I just want to note, and I will say this is, I am sure, completely my own fault. Ordinance 1016, or I'm sorry, Ordinance 164023, we will not actually be taking up this committee meeting. We will be coming back to it. And just, there's supposed to be some amendments on it, and we're still kind of looking into it. So that will be something that we'll take up at a later point, and since it was something that was really just brought up to clean up the code and not for any specific reason, there's not a big rush on it. We do have a public comment, and because we have one public comment, and we all know Ed, I can just ask him, Ed, would you like to do public comment now, or I'd like to deal with our two ordinances that I'm hoping we'll be able to move and then get into the bike discussion? And if you're happy to wait, we can deal with those, and I can invite you up, and I actually would love for you to, because I had a great deal to do with the ordinance that we were talking about, so I would actually love to invite you up. You can do public comment, and if you wouldn't mind staying up here in case we have your input. Fantastic, thank you. So let's first take up Ordinance 1861-24, an ordinance amending Part 2 of the Code of the City of Albany in relation to creating a pilot program for street performers. So this is my legislation. The real purpose of it is it's just a harebrained idea. I used to live in the Florida Keys, and in the Florida Keys there was sunset every day. A lot of street performers would come, and it was this huge attraction that started with the beautiful sunset there because it's beautiful, but it really became the main attraction. Everybody went to it because of all these street performers, and walking on the Skyway and feeling like maybe it needed a little bit more juice to really, it's a neat place, and it just seems like it would be neat to have some things going on there. So it's currently a pilot project just to see how it goes. It goes through cultural affairs, and the idea is to kind of see if we can get some buskers, street performers that can be in an area and draw people on different things. So if we're
I think my one question, which I think is sort of answered, it's a pilot program. If this does well, do we plan on expanding it to other parts of the city? Because I think I'm not opposed to this in any way, shape, or form. I think it's a wonderful idea, but I think there are some other places and spaces that would really benefit from people being able to do this and do it legally.
Absolutely, and I mean, I would say the reason why we wanted to do it a pilot project that was in discussion with the administration, and it seemed like the real focus was on the Skyway for me, just with the idea, and they weren't really sure how it would go, just opening it up everywhere. So I think if there was any sort of interest in doing it somewhere else, it'd be very easy to find it, and I think everybody would be very open to it.
Yeah, my thoughts were like this would also be perhaps a good addition to Washington Park. It would be perhaps a good addition to everything that we're trying to do on Upper Madison in that business district area. And those are places and spaces where I don't think that there'd be a lot of interference with folks who there's not a lot of interference with residential development. And I'm sure there are other areas in the city where the project would work. But that was my really only question about this, was that, I didn't want to see just one specific area of the city getting this treatment.
It's really just to kind of see how it goes and focus it, so it's not a wide open thing, just because it's not an idea. But I think everybody's very open to it going on that, and it would be great if it was successful. It's going to be really, really nice to place on this. I imagine that people get really upset, but it's just a major thing to do.
I love this idea. I love more stuff going on. Thanks for putting this forward. In the Washington Park area, there's two actually different groups that come to mind of Hongueros, a good group of older men that play with the drums. And they've been doing this quite regularly for quite a long time in Washington Park. Would they, and they've never paid for a permit or anything, would they then need to pay for a permit, or could they be helping with it? Or I'm thinking about them as like a
I don't, is that like a street performer, or is it more like a drum circle kind of thing, or they gather to, it's like a, because I would consider a group that kind of gathers, and that's not really the same thing as like a festival, for example.
just checking. Wanted to make sure that they can still do their
Yeah, and I also think that the only way somebody would be,
that had to stand up.
I would say the only way that somebody would be stopped with it is if they were reported in some way. So if like that group was really, I don't know, if they decide to get into like, who knows, like just
I'm thinking ahead.
something like dramatic, then they might be reported and then.
Yeah, well, to start by answering that question, by the letter of the law, I think, yeah, they would have to at least apply for a permit. There is the section in here that would allow the Department of Cultural Affairs to waive the permit fee, but I think they would still have to apply and obtain a permit, at least according to the way the law is written, which, I don't want to put this too bluntly, but leads me into my next point, which is, I don't really understand the purpose of this legislation in that you can count on a single hand, I think, the number of times I've seen a street performer in the city of Albany in the number of years I've lived here. So I don't really know why we're,
That's the point, Brett.
but I don't see how a licensure program encourages people to go out and perform in the street.
So it originated with talking about it, and then it actually was something I talked to Matt Peter about, who at that point was going to get the parking authority in to be involved. I don't know if that's something that can happen, but the whole concept is to create an actual program so that we do have street performers. And in order to do
Okay.
that, you have to have some sort of system for it, or at least that's what I was told when I asked about it.
Okay, I just, to me, it would seem to discourage people from performing in the street if they have to go through the process of obtaining a permit, and, you know, if police or whoever could, I don't want to say harass, but if the police could come and make them stop performing because they don't have a permit, that to me would seem to discourage them from doing so. That's a legal comment, I guess. There are some questions from the administration as far as how the process would work. This is kind of written as cultural affairs would do most of the heavy lifting here, but I think most licenses and permits are still issued through the clerk's office, so it's a little unclear, I think, how the
Well, I sent it to Cultural Affairs like 8 months ago and asked them to comment on it and to weigh in, and they never gave me anything, so I figured they were fine with it.
yeah, and I mean, you know, there may be
Because I too was like, I don't know if this is the right place for it, but after discussion, and there was a lot of discussion about where was the right place, kind of landed on Cultural Affairs. I brought it up to Cultural Affairs. I sent them the legislation. They provided no feedback. So in the assumption of many months of time, and no feedback, I assumed that they had no problems.
okay. And you know, it's not to say you can't work it out. I guess I would suppose I would just like to. It could probably even be a small fix, just to say that Cultural Affairs sets everything up, but that the clerk's office is the one who processes the permits, or Cultural Affairs could process the permits if that's how you want that to go.
I would say keep it all in one department. Currently, right now, the clerk's office, with the special event process, we do get quite a few individuals asking to sing in Washington Park. So, you know, it'd be one or two individuals to set up. Obviously, the fee is a lot more, but in regards to permitting, if it's something that the clerk's office will take on, they will take it on. But if it's for cultural affairs, I just think
application process and in a whole for special events, you know, it goes before a whole full committee, right? And then if we're gonna review it, there could be potential pushback from some departments whether or not it's allowed in certain areas.
The discussion that I had was that the concept was that this could be kind of the origination of a program where it could become a destination for people to go to. So,
I think that one thing that cultural affairs has that the clerk's office wouldn't have is synergy with other things that they might be doing. But I understand the capabilities of cultural affairs are what they are. So.
Would you be open, Councilmember Farrell, to have the Section 2 effect date to start 60 days after enactment and would conclude a year after its effective date to make it really in true codification a pilot program, just to say we're going to have this for a year, we're going to assess how we feel after the year, and then we can make it permanent.
I would not want to do that, mainly because I think it's something that would be nice to have year after year, and I think it's be nice to have it expanded some. If we do a sunset and it just goes away, then it's just gonna go away. So I would rather not have a sunset provision.
My main concern is that if Brett is saying that for example, like the Congueros will need a permit, like, I don't know, that just because Washington Park is in the 6th ward, I'm a little more hesitant of having it be super permanent if the way that people have been, like those men have been there for generations, doing the Congueros type stuff, and this is kind of like a big disruption to them that'll require like an application process and all that stuff.
I mean, I have to say, I don't see how anyone is going to call the police and say these men are operating without a permit if it's something that they think that implement something.
With due respect, though, I think we want to try and craft the law in a way so that there isn't that ambiguity, because if somebody did call the police on, which segues into another point I'll get to in a second, but just the way it's written now, no person shall perform magic, act, sing, dance, play music, act as a mime, perform acrobatics, juggle, or engage in similar entertainments upon the streets, sidewalks, or other public places. So, is the guy out there with his guitar singing to himself? Does he have to apply for a permit? I mean,
So what I would say
I know that's not the
is
intent,
this has
but
been going on for well over a year. I've asked for a lot of input and I've gotten zero.
I mean, this
So
is
my big issue right now is that I'd like to actually move forward with this, and the administration's been given a huge amount of time to respond, and I've gotten no response. So I
due respect, though,
really,
this is the first committee meeting that's come up like that.
but before it was even introduced, my goal was to have it so it was all set before, I personally endeavor, unless it's a huge piece of legislation like redoing the bike code, which we'll be discussing, my preference is to not have a discussion in committee. My preference is to do, especially something like that where it's a program, is to have it set up before we introduce it. And that is the way I operated, and the administration had at least 8 months, if not a year. So I'm very frustrated that I'm now getting this feedback of all of these issues when there was plenty of time to be given this.
For my part, I wasn't aware that you had done or attempted to do the legwork.
I did a lot of legwork on it, and I
On
got
the back
nothing
end.
back.
You know, I guess my general practice is to bring up issues in committee, so that's why I waited till
I
this evening to
totally
do that.
respect that, but when you're trying to do a program, it does make a lot more sense to just do it ahead of time, make sure that it's actually going to be run well, and then you can pass it quickly through, which was what I had hoped to happen with this, but clearly that was not the case, which I find incredibly disappointing.
Yeah, sorry for my comments on here too.
You weren't the problem, and you're not the problem either, Brett, but I do think that it's rather disingenuous of the administration to just allow things to, sit there, have a zero response, and now suddenly we're dealing with it. So, would you like to work on edits and we can not deal with it right now and we can deal with it very soon?
Sure, happy to work on that. And the one other point I was going to make was just the question of enforcement. The police resources stretch thin as they are already. It's just a matter of, will they be having to go around and check people's permits? Will they have to go talk to the gentleman, Councilor Romero's?
The goal behind it was to create a program where we have more street performers and more attraction to the Skylar, which is why I reached out and spoke to Cultural Affairs and we did a lot of moving around on who was going to do it and what. And, I don't really see the police having the time to run around to people who are playing a guitar somewhere with a hat out there and asking them for a permit. The goal is to have, and actually, even the mayor mentioned this, one of the press things, like, oh, we'll be able to have street performers. So there is knowledge about this, and I just don't truly understand why it is now an issue when we're just trying to create a structure so that we can have street performers perform and attract people to places where they are not going that are really good. So I'd love to move forward with that, and however it happens, if we could just do it sooner rather than later, that'd be great.
I'll make sure to have my comments, and talk with our newest neighborhood, before the next meeting.
Thank you. So because we're unable to move forward with that, perhaps we just have left with the next one. Ordinance 1962-24, an ordinance amending Article 8, Public Nuisance Abatement of Chapter 255, Presumptive Order of the Code of the City of Albany in relation to correcting definitions to match state law. Councilmember Keegan.
Thank you. So, can't remember why I was digging through this portion of the code, but I happened to pick up on the fact that, that section of the code was outdated because of marijuana legalization, and so, the changes to this essentially, delete the old part of the code reference and make reference to the updated component of state law that has to do with, cannabis. However, Jake, Richard Conti sent us an email today with some concerns about how we technically made the amendment, and I just wanted to go over that with you really quickly to garner your thoughts about his concerns, about the way that it wasn't the content, it's just the way that it was written.
Yeah, I think that Councilmember Conti brings up reasonable concerns of legislative drafting. It wouldn't, if we pass a law that amends 221 and right, it's not going to affect the law, but it is reasonable in terms of making it cleaner and easier for people who are looking at it from the public to understand. So I'm happy to take another look at his comments and revise the formatting to make sure that it's as clean and as accessible as possible.
So are we gonna postpone this then and not pass it through?
So I don't think that should stop us from passing. I think you should say pending amendments to fixed formatting. I think
Okay.
it needs sufficient enough for it.
Okay.
So, actually, would you like to make a motion, Councilmember?
Are we ready on that one?
Yeah, it's just gonna be moved with pending amendments, he's gonna fix the formatting to Richard's suggestion.
So I make a motion to pass ordinance 1962-24 out of the law committee with pending the amendments as suggested by former councilmember Richard Conti.
I would second it.
I was gonna say, it's my legislation, I don't think I should.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you so much. come on up. We'll now be dealing with ordinance 2481-24, an ordinance amending chapter 359 vehicles and traffic and chapter 251 parks and recreation of the code of the city of Albany in relation to the operation of active transportation in the city of Albany. We'll begin with public comment, and I will give a huge thank you to Ed Brennan, who really did a lot of this. And normally I am a stickler for timing people, but I am not going to time Ed, and it is my hope that he'll remain in that spot so he can be available for discussion.
There we go.
For recording purposes.
Please press here to turn on mic. I got it. Can you hear me now? Ed Brennan, 389 McCormick Road, Albany, New York. First of all, I want to thank you very much for addressing the archaic ordinance concerning bicycles and other forms of active transportation that Albany's had. Much of it was inappropriate for the early 20th century, never mind the 21st century. We discussed the proposal among members of the Albany Bicycle Coalition, which I'm president, and we came up with a few additional suggestions after, we did our work in putting it together, things that we hadn't noticed. First is that the ordinance didn't address shared multi-use paths, like along Hackett Boulevard, Corning Trail, South End Connector, the one we're building along Breveter. So in consideration of that, the 5-foot rule and the 5-mile-per-hour rule that we apply for sidewalks doesn't seem logical for spaces that everyone understands are for shared use. We would not object to reasonable rules, including speed limits that encourage respectful shared use of such trails and spaces. I know the Albany County Rail Trail, for example, they've got a set of rules that they have posted along that trail, and I know that they're also thinking about putting in the speed limit along the trail. And I'd encourage you to reach out perhaps to the county and consider whether maybe some uniformity among those kind of trail rules in the city and the county, whether or not that would be appropriate so that people, when they go from one trail to another, they're not expecting an entirely vastly different set of rules from one place to another. Secondly, it was noted that the 5-foot rule for separating bicycles and pedestrians might be odd when there's no such defined distance rules for motor vehicles when they pass pedestrians in places in the city where there are no sidewalks. There's an odd thing in the New York State vehicle and traffic law. All the states around us, Vermont being the most recent, I believe there's I forget the number, but there's only 8 states in the United States, one of them being New York, that doesn't have a defined passing distance for when a motorist is passing a bicycle, and in some cases defined as just a vulnerable road user. New York State does have 2 sections of the vehicle and traffic law. First of all, Section 1122A, which is just with respect to overtaking bicycles, and Section 1146, which applies to avoiding collisions with pedestrians and bicycles on roadways. Neither of them have a defined distance, like 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, whatever. Section 1122A says to pass to the left of a bicycle at a safe distance. Just says safe distance. 1146 says use due care use due care to avoid collision with a pedestrian or a cyclist. I think that it's interesting that the Vermont law, which is the most recent one, just passed last year, they use that due care, and they left in the due care, but they define due care. And I think that's something that the city might consider doing. Right now, since Vermont has just passed that law, in New York State is surrounded by states with defined safe passing, all of them being at least 3 feet or 4 feet, the most recent ones being 4 feet in Vermont. is to maybe make it a 4-foot law, which is what we're trying to get passed across the street over here at the legislature. And I think that was what Vermont did, and I think that's what we're hoping to do. And it's going to be 4 feet for all vulnerable road users. And so, just to make it consistent, I think instead of 5 feet, to have a greater distance for bicycles to pedestrians than cars to pedestrians or bicycles. It seems odd. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Especially if you consider that I think this fellow Wes, this engineering professor, figured out that it would a bicycle would need to be traveling over 100 miles an hour to amass as much kinetic energy as a car, average sedan going 30 miles an hour. The physics, the laws of physics just don't match up. So if we just think of 4 feet across the board, I think it would be helpful. And there are there's counties in New York State that have their own defined safe crossing law. Even though the state didn't do it, Monroe County has a 3-foot law. Suffolk County has a 3-foot law. I don't think there's any reason why Albany just can't say. In the city of New York, we define a due care distance as 4 feet. And that would apply to whether you're in a car or a bicycle or whatever. That's how close you should be when you're passing or getting close to a vulnerable road user. So, but those are the 2 things that we picked up. Otherwise, we're really happy that this is moving along. There's a lot of silliness in the laws that are going on.
No, I definitely appreciate all of your work and input on it. Just out of curiosity for our attorneys, and I'm nice to meet again, so sorry about that. But can we do rules on this street like that? Like, I know that there's a lot of things that we are not able to do in streets. I personally don't have an issue switching it to 4 feet on the sidewalk, but I don't know.
You mean in terms of dimension of streets and
Well, no, in terms of, like, if we wanted to add in here a due care distance for a car with, one of the things that Ed brought up, which I think is a relevant point that we should include, is that we probably should include rules about bike lanes and things like that as well.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense to have it in the bike code, to have rules, specific rules about that in the bike or the active transportation code. But if we were to include something like the due care distance for cars, are we allowed to do that?
my gut thought is that the state regulates these things pretty heavily and has encompassed a lot of this stuff that could mean no, but the fact that I think you said that certain counties have laws like that would
Yeah.
indicate that local governments do have some control over that, so I'd have to look into it now. It's a maybe.
Yeah, I think we're much more likely to have control over, we could certainly put in standards for how bike lanes are done to a point, but I would think that the other question, and I'm happy to do more research on that as well, but I think we'll have to look into that.
Okay, because I would be thrilled to include it in our legislation if it's something we're able to do.
The state is generally pretty hesitant to let municipalities really set the rules of the road, because that's often how you end up with small villages trying to ticket anybody who drives through them for revenue. So we definitely have to look into what specifically we're allowed to do on that, but we will do that.
Yeah. And take a look at what Monroe County and Suffolk County did.
Thank you, because it'd be great if we could. I know we have to jump through a lot of hoops just to change our speed limit 5 miles an hour.
But on the other respect is, since we think we're really close to getting this passed this year, given that all the other states around us now have, at least a 3-foot, and the most recent ones have a 4-foot, that to make it 5-foot for bicycles is just odd, so just change it to 4.
Yeah, that's totally doable.
First of all, I'm super excited about this legislation. There's one niggler for me, and this did come up in public comments. While I know that we quantify in here pedestrians as individuals walking or using adaptive equipment, we don't separately define adaptive. So you can have somebody in an electric scooter; they're not
Mhm.
required to
Right.
have registration or authorization. It would
Yep.
still be defined as an electric scooter, but it's being utilized as adaptive equipment. And so I'm hoping if we do amendments that we might be able to construct some language that properly pulls adaptive equipment out from the rest of this.
Yeah. I think if you look at the definition of a pedestrian in the vehicle and traffic law, you'll note that it includes a wheelchair. And the definition of a wheelchair includes electric mobility devices.
Okay.
So I think in a roundabout way, I think if
I
they're
just
already
like
included
things to
under
be-
pedestrian, maybe not, I mean, it would be something that the
So-
gentleman over here to look at as well.
I have, I went through again, and I do have edits on this that I figured I would go through tonight. And one of them is in the definition of electric scooter, I have an electric mobility aid would be an electric adaptive aid, including a wheelchair that is used to provide transportation to a disabled person is not considered an electric scooter.
That's all I was looking for, because
I tried like piecing it together in a way. I didn't want to include. I didn't want to be too prescriptive in pedestrian because I didn't want something to be used for a mobility aid that wasn't technically an adapt. I want if somebody's using it as a mobility aid, it's okay.
Yeah.
And that's why I figured putting it in the electric scooter definition would be.
I don't care. It just came up in public comment, and while it may be very clear under state law, whenever we're doing local law, I like for people to not have to know that this is further defined somewhere else in greater law, if that makes any sense.
Right. Okay.
That was my one sort of big in reviewing all of this, was like, I don't want those things to be confused, because I think the intent of this is to address the actual electric scooters that are popping up everywhere.
Which number am I on?
I have a few questions. In the section 359.24, which is motor vehicle use on areas designated for bicycles, I just wanted to clarify that the prohibition on motor vehicles use in areas designated for bicycles, it just says no motor vehicle, and is that defined in this bill as bicycle with electric assist, scooters?
No, motor vehicle means car.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that, so,
To your point, motor vehicle, a definition of that would be clear.
oh, Ed's hand is up, love that.
Yeah, I mean, just as a matter of form, and maybe it's a question more for the legal folks over here, might it be better to just say so explicitly saying we are incorporating the definition of the vehicle and traffic law for pedestrian, for motor vehicle, and motor vehicle, and specifically doesn't include. If you look at it, it excludes electric bikes, electric scooters as defined under Article 34A, and all the, so all those definitions are answered in the VTL. And you wouldn't want to, in a roundabout way, like be violating the VTL. And I'm just saying, by putting in those definitions yourself, what happens if they change a word or two or add some other device in the VTL next year? Then you're kind of stuck. So you might, I don't know if there's a way to do it in the law, but just incorporate by reference the definitions of the VTL, just say explicitly.
Yeah, it is something that we regularly do.
And for that reason, because
Yeah.
So would that, just to open up a quick discussion on that, and then I have one more point, which is, should electric vehicles, should electric bikes and scooters be in the bike lane with regular bicycles? Yes, I see Ed nodding. Okay,
Yeah.
that's your,
That's what and if you look at the state of the vehicle and traffic law, an e-bike has to follow the explicit rules for e-bikes and scooters, and other than that, they should follow the bicycle rules.
understood. So the prioritization is that those electric assist mobility devices should be prioritized to be in the bike lane. If not able to be in the bike lane, those motorized movements should be on the road.
If there's no bike lane, yeah,
there's
they
no
should be,
bike lane.
and the rules of the road say they should be on the right-hand side of the road when they're unless there is not enough space on the right-hand side, it's a narrow road, or if there's debris in there, then you can move to the center of the road, or unless you're making a left-hand turn.
Great, that makes a lot of sense, and I would love to include that in the bill, unless I'm just not reading it correctly, but that makes sense to me.
Yeah, that's
And
the law, that's already in the vehicle and traffic law, so.
Great. And then the only reason I say that that's important is because this is this bill is so comprehensive, and it's one that a lot of people are focused and interested in. And although it is definitely, all of us here, I'm sure, are familiar with the VTL in New York State law. I think when people read this bill, we might not be as familiar with VTL stuff. So having a little bit more definition could be helpful for the average constituent. And then the second point was that in discussing this bill with constituents, people are very concerned about bikes, meaning non-motorized, but just your average bicycle on sidewalks. And I just want to open that up as a point to discuss in the committee and hear from you as a expert, frankly, Ed, on these types of things, how you feel about bicycles on sidewalks, what the implications are of this bill, and what the going, research and thought process is on allowing for bicycles to be on sidewalks. So it's a really big concern, at least in Sixth-Ward, and some of our sidewalks are kind of small, sometimes they're, we're a very dense neighborhood, and so how can we make sure that we're prioritizing pedestrians? And if the answer to that is just writing into the bill that we are prioritizing pedestrians if bicycles are on the sidewalk, I think that could be a middle ground, but I'm opening it up just because it's something that's deeply discussed.
And I will say that this was something that was actually very important to me, that I wanted this to come from the mindset of the sidewalk is, I kind of thought of it as like a pedestrian bill of rights, where the sidewalk is for pedestrians, but there are a lot of places in the city, especially in my neighborhood and big chunks of where I ride my bike, and I'm also, again, I've said many times, I'm a wimpy bike rider. I wear a helmet, I do all the things, but I'm nervous riding with traffic, and there's a lot of traffic that goes even 30 miles an hour, 25 miles an hour is pretty fast for a giant, even small one-ton vehicle to go by you. And so to have that flexibility so that in neighborhoods, and especially our current bike ordinance, I think if we over 12, then you have to be on the road. And sorry, but like a 13-year-old riding their bike out Western Avenue, like I would rather them be on the sidewalk. I would rather anybody, or an elderly person. If there's an older person who's in their 70s who's riding their bike and they're not comfortable, I would rather them ride their bike on the sidewalk and defer to pedestrians. So that was something that I explicitly talked to Ed and Ann Savage about. It may not be the trend of bicycles. So Ed I don't want to put Ed in a position where he's like, no, this is he might think that it's actually a terrible idea, but I think in function and safety, our bike code, or our active transportation code, should allow people to be safe. And sometimes, unfortunately, that means not riding on the street if you're a bicycle. but it should always mean that you're deferring to a pedestrian if you're on a sidewalk.
Before we turn it over to Ed, just a quick thought, as we're talking about language, if there was something that we could add in after hearing from Ed too,
So I actually have amendments written
Okay,
for it, so
sorry.
if, just because that was something that's very, again, we'll let Ed answer it. I don't know that that's actually what people want and like people want. I just,
Okay. All right. Short history. First of all, just go back to what the law is on sidewalks. The state pretty much leaves sidewalks up to municipalities. Municipalities can do what they want to do with the sidewalks. They're yours. Okay. You can let bicycles on. You can not let bicycles on. Regular bicycles. Electric bicycles, just the opposite. Under the VTL says electric bicycles, electric scooters should not be used on the sidewalk unless they're allowed by the local municipality. So it just flips it. Okay, you can allow it if you want, but you need to do it explicitly. As far as it goes into an interesting history. If you're familiar with the League of American Cyclists and some of the history of cycling, there was I forget the name of the guy who was really the impetus behind the League of American Cyclists for a long time and legislation, but he brought up this whole idea of vehicular cycling, like a bicycle is a vehicle, and when you're on the road, you are a vehicle, you should act like a vehicle. And this, in reality, very few people can ride like that. It's really for he was one of the spandex crowd, and he's kind of like that. So people are not comfortable riding in traffic. If we want to get more people to be able to use active transportation, you need to be a lot more flexible. In fact, the League of American Cyclists, for a long, long, long time, they were quite a bit against bike lanes. Oh no, bike lanes are terrible. People get hurt all the time on bike lanes. People are safer in traffic. Crazy things like that. And they stopped a lot of bike lanes from being installed in a lot of places until people sort of wised up. And now League of American Cyclists is also changing their tune. But with respect to sidewalks, like you said, they really are the domain of the pedestrian. So you need to really make sure that pedestrians feel safe when they're on a sidewalk. And first of all, like I said, it would take a very strange circumstance for a cyclist to be able to kill a pedestrian on a sidewalk. They just don't have, it's all mass and velocity, and there's not enough mass and there's not enough velocity. Like I said, a cyclist would have to be going over 100 miles an hour to do the same damage as a sedan going 30 miles an hour. Doesn't say that it's not going to ruin somebody's day, broken noses, broken arms, broken wrists, and a lot of unnecessary hardship. So we want to make sure that if cyclists are going to be using sidewalks, that we put in the kind of rules that we have there. If you're going to be on a sidewalk, you go at a walking speed. And there's reasons for that, not just for the pedestrian, but also for the cyclist. There's an incident that happened right here in Albany out by Western Avenue. If you go out Western Avenue by the University Plaza where the bagel place is and there's that mobile station, you'll notice there used to be a ghost bike there. And it was for a woman named Diva something, or I forget her last name, but she ran the Some Girl shop over in Troy. I think she had like 2 or 3 shops. And she was killed there. She was riding on the sidewalk, going straight towards SUNY Albany. Somebody took a left, following an arrow. They had the arrow, but they didn't see her coming out from behind a vehicle, a parked car, and hit and killed her. And that's not unusual. When you're on a sidewalk, you've got a lot more crossings. You've got all kinds of business driveways, pedestrian driveways. If people are turning around, they're looking for behind them. They're looking at traffic mostly because they don't want to get whacked. They might be looking a short distance away to make sure that there's not a kid there or a pedestrian. They're not expecting something coming out of their field of vision as fast as a bicycle on a sidewalk. So if people are going to be on a sidewalk, they need to know that they need to take extra care. They need to still be riding with traffic. If you're on a sidewalk, because if the sidewalk ends and you need to be in the road, you don't want to be facing traffic, because that's also dangerous, extremely dangerous, because if you think about speed of a collision, now you're adding your speed going in one direction where a car speed's going the other direction. It's a recipe for bad news. So I think what you have in there is that you've got a walking speed of 5 miles an hour on sidewalk. People think that's crazy. I don't want to be going 5 miles an hour on a sidewalk. People aren't going to want to do that. But I think if you, 5, 6, 7, nobody's going to be out there with a speedometer anyway looking at bicycles on a sidewalk. But you want to get the idea that you're going at a walking speed on a sidewalk. And I think that's safe. Normally, though, I don't ride on sidewalks just because I know they're dangerous, and I know how to behave in traffic. I'm using my mirrors. I've got my helmet on, and I'm riding defensively. That said, there are locations where I do use sidewalks. Especially like wide open areas where you can think of like along Polo Road, where you've got a sidewalk and you've got 4 lanes of traffic going very fast and very little shoulder, if any shoulder, but there's a sidewalk that nobody's going to be using. There's not a lot of driveways, things like that. But otherwise, it's generally safer to be in traffic, riding with traffic, being predictable and make sure you're noticed by traffic. Does that answer your question? The other question is e-bikes.
No,
Yeah.
it does. It sounds
Yeah.
like you and other experienced cyclists on every spectrum that people occasionally do use the sidewalk if needed and for safety purposes.
Yeah.
My only thing is if we could add, and then we have amendments, but just, on behalf of my constituents, if we could add more of a pedestrian focus and on their safety in that section on the exemption on sidewalks.
I would just hold a second because I have some amendments for that, because that was something I'm also interested in. And I just want to also note, just so it's on the record as part of the discussion, I would also not want to I'd like this to be consistent throughout the city and not have a section where we don't have riding on the sidewalks. And the reason for that is I would use the skateboarding ordinance, which was never enforced because the police did not know where it began and ended. So I'd like to have instead a strong, consistent thing that creates a clear, safe space for the pedestrian on the sidewalk, that if they're not feeling safe, there is cause to have the person get a ticket for whatever it is that they're doing, instead of trying to create a situation where it's just very difficult for the police to have any sort of enforcement because they're not sure, where the 6 words begins and ends, or is it on this side of the street or that side of the street. I think it's better to have a consistent code that we can then look at and say there can be clear enforcement, because I think that's an important part too.
Language that you might consider using and putting in there to emphasize the primacy of the pedestrian is that the cyclist should be prepared to stop, always prepared to stop and or dismount and walk your bicycle if need be, to avoid coming in close contact with pedestrians.
I appreciate you using that language, because when I was writing some things up here, I was like, I usually, when I am on my bicycle on the sidewalk, I usually stop and get off, and that just didn't sound like a good thing to put into code. So
Yeah, dismount is
stop
a
and
word that's
dismount sounds
commonly used.
way
Yeah,
better.
yeah.
Get off the bike. If you don't mind, I'll go through quickly some of the changes that I filed, just to see how people felt about it. And then I had a question. So we had some feedback that people emailed to us, and one of them was feedback about having all of the different classes of electric bicycles. And I just wanted to, do you have any feedback on that? They were saying that, and with a valid point, that maybe that's something that we shouldn't put in our code, but could refer to something else so that it
I mean,
doesn't.
the class 1, class 2, class 3, yeah, I would just incorporate the state law by reference, because that's defined in the
Yep.
VTL, which I think they get out of the Code of Federal Regulations, I think ultimately, but it's, you refer to the VTL.
Perfect. So we can actually just refer it to. And then if we're gonna keep going, in electric scooter, I had that section that says, and I will type this up for our attorney so that you guys don't actually have to read my scribble. But an electric mobility aid, including a wheelchair, that is used to provide transportation to a disabled person, is not considered an electric scooter, to kind of make that clear. And another thing I wanted to do is I wanted to take out handlebars, and maybe see, just because we have those, Brett had done this before where we had to take out handlebars and seats so that those one-wheeled things were included, otherwise we
You
didn't.
don't want to do that. The reason why is an electric scooter is defined in the VTL. If you look at the definition, it's defined as having a handlebar.
So that is fine for VTL. I would like for our laws to make sure that we're able to capture those one-wheeled electric things.
Yeah, and you've also got like electric skateboards, you know.
Yeah, so I would just love to, and I don't know if it's something I'm happy to defer, like it doesn't need to be called an electric scooter, it can be called electric wheel device, I don't know what to call it, but I don't wanna, I really want, especially those one-wheeled device things.
Yeah.
They're very impressive, but they also go very fast, and people, I just wanna make sure that those are covered.
Yeah, they're limited. I think in talking to another attorney that I had to go through all this because I actually did a training class for our police out at the academy on this recently, and other officers from area forces in the county. And I talked to another attorney that also is doing a class down on Long Island, and we had a long discussion about these. And our conclusion is that they're limited use vehicles under the vehicle and traffic law. These are devices that are not registered, not registerable. So if you guys are looking at those definitions, I think take a good look at limited use vehicles. On top of limited use vehicles, there's limited use motorcycles, limited use automobiles. They're separate because those are separate things. But just a general limited use vehicle, I think those are what we're talking about here. And otherwise, what you do about them, there was a big discussion with the police that were there, because they're saying, like, what do they brought up the one wheels themselves. It's like, what do we do about these guys? What are they? You know, how do we handle them? And as far as I can tell, is that they don't have any legal right to be on a road. But then, what do you do to them? You're using an unregisterable vehicle on the road. But you kind of do have it in your legislation where you talk about what you can do for people that have, I think, in expanding what your definition of ATVs.
Yeah, we have unregistered motor device in there.
Right.
Which it could be, I
I think
would
that's where they
love
are.
to- And I'll share it with, if we can't do it, I would love to just take out the handlebars, and I don't know that it's necessary either, just so in our own code, we have the ability to do, like, there is some oversight to them.
Right.
If, the state of New York says that they're illegal, then, obviously that is its own thing, but it's not really necessary to have a handlebar in there, so.
Right. I mean, they're not legal to be on the road, but that doesn't mean what are the police going to do about it? The other problem that the police have is they don't have a code in their electrical system, in their reporting system for these things, and so they have to write up a paper ticket, and then when they turn in the paper ticket, they just throw them away. They don't ever enforce paper tickets. Apparently, whoever does the enforcement of them once they go into the court. So it's a very, very strange situation.
Just to
clarify, our office does do the VMT prosecution, and anecdotally, I have not seen any for those sort of monowheel things that you're talking about, from the trail, whatever they're called. We do get very occasionally tickets, including paper tickets.
Yeah.
We do get paper tickets and prosecute those. We get them very rarely for electric vehicles or electric scooters, things like
Right.
that. Pretty infrequent, but they figure out a way to do it on
Okay.
occasion.
That's comforting, because I was getting something else from even the APD people that were with us. They were expressing their frustration to me about it. I forget the name system that they use. I can't think of it. Yeah.
Jake,
not
you
sure.
wanted to add something as well?
Yeah, so I'm thinking that if we want to both maintain consistency with state definitions and also make sure that we regulate those additional electronic devices, you could create a separate definition category. I know we have, where under electric scooter, there's other human propelled device. You could create something like other electric propelled device that would
Yeah.
contain those skateboards and unicycles and whatnot. We would then have to exempt that from the rest of unregistered motorized devices. But I know that Brett and I were saying we can meet and discuss language that can both include those objects of regulation and also wouldn't be inconsistent with state law.
Yeah, I wouldn't even limit it to electrical, because you've got people like hooking up gas-powered motors to all kinds of things too. You see some crazy stuff out there. But yeah,
So, yeah, so
I would keep the scooter definition with this to be consistent with the state, or just incorporate it by reference and just make up
Have
Something
another
else.
one?
Yeah.
And then-
additional small vehicles or something.
Yeah.
Either way, we can work. with
Yeah,
that.
I mean, that's something, they kinda, I'm very impressed with them. I don't wanna ever say that I'm not impressed by anybody that can do that, because it's very impressive, but they do kinda drive me crazy. And then a quick note on the pedestrian definition. Can or should we include like a stroller with it? Does that matter that much? Just because I do feel like if somebody's pushing a stroller, then
Well, the person pushing the stroller is a pedestrian, but the person in the stroller isn't the pedestrian. Right, so the person pushing the stroller would be the person walking, or if they're in the wheelchair pushing the stroller, that's still the
Alright.
person.
that sounds good to me. As long as I don't need to, I just
Although as a parent of stroller-age children, I'm intrigued by the idea of a self-propelled stroller.
Can we require the kid to walk on his own?
Yeah.
we're gonna work on that too. This ordinance comes with an invention. You're welcome. So then we get to the next, if we flip the page, what I'd love to have is a different section A that says something along the lines of, and again, we will have actual language that we'll be able to provide feedback with at another meeting, but something along the lines of sidewalks are considered for pedestrian usage and pedestrians have the right of way, is encouraged for bicycles and other human-powered devices to utilize the roadway if it is unsafe. The rules below, bicycles and other active transportation things. I have scribbles all over my page of a lot of different things. So the basic concept is to, that I would love to wordsmith at a future point in time, is to say that a sidewalk is for pedestrians with, that they have the right of way. We'd like bicycles and everything else to not be in the sidewalk, but if you need to be there for safety reasons, then you must follow these rules.
I have a quick question for you too, while we're having this discussion. Because you have other legislation that's floating around regarding skateboard. Is this gonna supersede?
Yeah, the skateboard, that was done to try to make the neighborhood happy, and it made them very mad and stuff, so. Yeah, it was created because I knew that this would take a long time, so to provide some sort of
I wanna make
oversight of
sure
skateboards,
my
that
brain
was
is,
loaded, but that will not be, that's not gonna be moved over, but,
but does this then cover the use of skateboards? Yes, okay.
Yeah, what a time that was. Thank you, Councilmember Farrell, for introducing that back in the day. This definitely covers that, and I think something I wanted to just add to that came to me, but also might help for the language in 359.4 is something that Ed mentioned, which is like a walking pace. I think that is a helpful clarifying term to explain 5 miles an hour, because that's, I don't really know what that is.
I don't know if that should be in our code, though. I feel like that would be more helpful, and I do think it would be something that we should encourage, that we actually have, I don't know if it's like a flyer or some FAQ once we go through this that shows what the rules are, because I don't know that I wouldn't want to have a walking piece in there and have somebody say like, well, I walk 10
Right.
miles an hour.
You
I
can define your walking pace.
Yeah.
But for like that clarifying thing, I think that would be very helpful, because that is, I didn't think of that either until you said it. And I was like, oh yeah.
And for the 5 feet, even the 4 feet, for sidewalks in our more denser neighborhoods, they're just so tiny that often a 5 or even 4 foot distance would mean that you'd be behind the pedestrian, right? Like you wouldn't be able to be on the same sidewalk tile as them.
You'd be
But-
walking your bicycle.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And so do we need to codify that? No. Or we
Well,
could.
I do. I mean, we actually, that was something that I did want to work in the stop and dismount. It was,
Agree.
and I think we can say 4 feet, or stop and
And
dismount.
dismount. Okay.
Yeah, dismount and walk your bicycle. That's just as a note, like going through, I think it was Savannah, Georgia, wherever I was, and there was a park where you came to a very dense area of the park by the fountain where everybody was gathering, and there were signs there that says cyclist dismount until you leave that dense area. So that's another option. I don't know how you would work that into the legislation, just maybe reference that, and dismount in areas where signage says to dismount and
Great.
walk your bicycles.
Love that. And then just on the public campaign, Councilmember Harrell, that you mentioned, maybe if we could time this possibly in a way with the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. I don't know. I don't want to like take over that campaign. That's an important one, but this is something that is frankly just as important and will change the way our city moves forward with bicycling and non-pedestrian movement. So if we can
I don't
touch
know
that
if there
train-
actually is a plan for a public thing. I think it's something we need to be encouraging, because it would be helpful to have, once we have this, to actually put guidelines out where people can just look it up and say, but we can certainly encourage everybody to do that. I agree with what you said.
something on social media with the 25-mile-an-hour stuff.
So next, flip over the page, motorized scooters. That section, we had feedback from someone that pointed out, Mr. Bennett, and he said, doesn't even talk about motorized scooters, and he's right. So it should probably be called unregistered motorized devices. And I will share with people. And then if we move on to the next section, the drivers to exercise due care section. It's not that I don't think we should have a section that is called drivers to exercise due care. I love that. It's just, I don't think anything in that section is necessary. Like, I don't know that we need a whole section on horses. I don't know. Like, in fact, I know in the city of Albany, we are not allowed to have our own domesticated sheep, cattle, and goats. So I don't know why we would put them in the bike code. Obviously, if somebody brought a domesticated sheep from out of town, we were walking on the sidewalk, I also don't think that a bicyclist is gonna be like, hold on, let me check the bike code to see what I'm supposed to do with the sheep. So I don't know that we actually, I think that there's just some pieces that I was like, maybe we can pull out the horses, pull out a few things, but keep in the drivers to exercise due care, because I think that is important. And like maybe we can have the due care distance in there or something like that. But we talk a lot about livestock in this, and I think that that's held over from the old bike code, which that was very relevant because that's, people are riding horses and not cars. So
I don't know though that wouldn't, and taking that out wouldn't impact any consequences that for our mounted police, because we have mounted police. Like we literally do have horses in the city.
For what it's worth, there's already a VTL section entitled Drivers to Exercise Due Care, so we could probably get away with just repealing that entire section outright.
It would be fine if it's really the entire section. You could also just, if you really wanted to keep some language like that in the code, you could repeal everything after due care and just have, notwithstanding any other law to the contrary, every driver of vehicle shall exercise due care to avoid colliding.
I just read from the VTL. Drivers to exercise due care, notwithstanding provisions of any other law to the contrary, every driver of a vehicle shall exercise due care to avoid colliding with any bicyclist, pedestrian, or domestic animal upon any roadways. I think that's where the language in the code is coming from as it is, so
yep, and that
if you have to have it in there really at this point.
yeah, and I don't know.
Turns out that's where all the language about goats comes from, is state law.
I think that's fine. If it is possible to have the due care distance in, I would love to put that in this code, and that would be a great spot for it, but otherwise, I think we can probably remove it.
Yeah, that is how Vermont handled their 4-foot law, is they had the same kind of due care law, and they just defined what due care is as a distance. Slow down, actually they should say, when they said slow down and no more than 4 feet. No less than 4 feet.
There was some feedback that we got in the next page, and I just wanted to mention it, that so and I will say I do a lot of these different things in our old code. It is the reminder of how old this is. Because any bicycles and motors must carry lighted lamps after dark. Yeah. No vehicles drawn by horses. But no part of Washington or Lincoln Park shall be used for a place of instruction in the use of any vehicle. And I'm assuming that's to really focus on people teaching kids how to drive there, which is, I don't really know exactly, but somebody just said feedback and they're like, does that mean that like you can't teach a kid to ride a bike in Washington Park? And again, I don't know that, I'm not sure why that's in there. I don't know if it's a necessary.
Yeah, well, I mean, since it does say vehicle, I believe, and vehicle is defined in vehicle and traffic law to exclude bicycles. And I think actually it says human-powered devices, actually, but I think it may actually say human-powered devices.
Great, because,
Yeah.
so maybe we can just take out any and just have it. Yeah.
So if you're saying vehicle, and if you're using the vehicle, if you're incorporating by reference the VTL definition of vehicle, then I think it's fine. Whether it would include an e-bike would be another question. But shouldn't be teaching a kid how to use an e-bike, because nobody under 16 should be on an e-bike.
Yeah.
Vehicle and traffic law.
Agreed. I would think that, I would hope that they start on, like, it's just doing this and not looking at it, but you never know with people.
Yeah.
The one thing that I would add before we kind of move on for the evening is that we did get some feedback saying that that since we have the 5 miles an hour, that perhaps we could allow e-bikes on the sidewalk. I do not like that. I would rather keep, especially because we are allowing any sort of mobility help for a disabled person on sidewalks as just part of being a pedestrian. I would not want to expand it to a motorized, to anything with a motorized, anything with a motor, because I do think that then it becomes an enforcement issue. You know, how do you tell the difference between 5 miles an hour and 10 miles an hour? I think it can make people feel very unsafe. And it certainly should be allowed to have, if somebody is in, you know, needs mobility help and they're in a motorized scooter thing, that's fine. But my own personal preference is to not have anything else on the sidewalk because I do think it becomes an enforcement issue. So,
Not on that point, just taking a quick step backward. With regard to the section about parks, I'm looking at 251.7, what will now be D, with regard to regulating parking of motor vehicles depending upon roadways. We got rid of Washington Park, but now it kind of reads as if the Commissioner of Parks regulates parking of vehicles on any roadway in connection with special events, and I think that's probably not the intent of the Commissioner's we probably want this to extend to parks. So rather than cross out of Washington Park, maybe we just say in city parks or something. And then theatrical events held, and then we get rid of the word there and get rid of the word held as well. I guess any special
that
event.
is an excellent point. Thank you. So I will, and actually, Jake, is it at all possible, would you mind, do you have a Word document of this I know I have it, but it's buried somewhere. If somebody wouldn't mind emailing it to me so then I can do track changes and
Yeah,
not
we
have
can
to try to
definitely-
read my handwriting. It would probably make your life simpler.
I can just do that right now.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate it. So this discussion will continue. Ed, thank you so much for all of your help with this, and please, anybody else that was helpful to you, thank you to Ann Savage too, who
Yeah.
was also helpful. We really, really appreciate all of your advocacy and all of your work on this, and this will be, hopefully next time we'll have something that we are excited about. And I will also, if you're okay with it, I'll share that red line version with you too. So
That'd
you
be
can,
great. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
great, thank you so much. All right, so if there is nothing else this evening, if I could get a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councilman Keegan, seconded by Romero. All in favor, aye. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful night.